What is up, enthusiasts? It is Heater Flags here, and welcome back to another one of my videos. Around 11 p.m. last night, we got major news coming out of Luna Park in Sydney, Australia. And that big news is that they are expanding their amusement park entirely, coming out with a whole new land including 3 roller coasters. These 3 roller coasters include a Kiddie Helix coaster, a Family Shuttle coaster, and the world's first Intamin single rail coaster. It is called Big Dipper, and we'll get to that name in a little bit and why it's called that. But the reason this is so newsworthy is because this will be the first single railed coaster by Intamin to come on the market. Now, if you don't remember, Intamin came out with a few roller coaster concepts a few months ago, and one of them were including the single rail roller coaster. Now, this is not an original concept. As you may or may not know, Rocky Mountain Construction, or RMC for short, coined this single rail a few years back, and they have came out with 2 roller coasters that feature this so far, including Wonder Woman Golden Lasso at Fiesta, Texas, and Railblazer at California's Great America. And there are 2 more coming along the way in 2021. And since the first Intamin single rail has been announced, there is officially competition on the market. And later in this analysis, I will talk about what I think will be the better ride overall. But first, let's look at the single rail coaster coming to Luna Park first. Now, like I said, this ride will be called Big Dipper, and the reason is because they have had 2 coasters in the past in that same plot of land called Big Dipper. In the 30s, they opened up an old wooden coaster named Big Dipper, and that closed in '79 and was replaced by an aero looper called Big Dipper, which closed in the early 2000s. And now in 2020, the Big Dipper is coming back in the form of an Intamin single rail coaster. So that's a pretty interesting fact. It's Big Dipper number 3. And Big Dipper is a pretty generic name for a coaster. Looking at the themes by the renderings and concepts of it, it looks pretty generic. Now the trains have this sort of race car theme, but this color scheme is red and white with yellow trains. And looking at the station and the queue, it's all generic, so I'm just assuming that this is going to be a generic boardwalk coaster. So enough with that, let's talk about the actual ride experience itself. So we're first going to talk about the first launch. You start off with this launch, which will take you to a top speed of around 32 miles an hour. You'll go into a left-hand turn, and you'll go into a few little bunny hills to warm you up for the second launch. This is basically acting as a booster, and it will take you up to a top speed of 45 miles an hour. After that, you'll go into a non-vertical loop, which is the highest point of the ride, even though we do not know the top height of this element. And after that, you will go into this Immelman. What looks really cool about this part of the ride is that the Immelman actually goes through the center of the non-inverting loop, which really shows you how much space they had to work with and how convenient this element is. After that, you go into a sharp airtime hump, which does look like the most intense part of the ride. After that, you'll go into this weird S-bend element that banks you 3 different sides, and then you will go into this low-to-the-ground overbank turn. They're calling it a wave turn, but it doesn't look like it will give you any forces, so I'm just going to call it an overbank. After that, you go into a zero-gravity roll, once again low to the ground. After that, you make a 180-degree turn right to the final brake run. So that is the full ride experience on the Big Dipper Part 3. So let's analyze this a little bit. Looking at the layout itself, one thing I really like about this ride is that first of all, it has a lot of variety when it comes to the elements. Second off, it's cool that they mix some long drawn out elements, hence the Immelman and the non-inverting loop, with some low-to-the-ground elements on the second half of the ride. But looking at a little con of the ride, it looks nowhere near as intense as anticipated. Now, this is an Intamin coaster, and it is designed for thrill seekers, so I'm just curious why they truly didn't go all the way. Looking at some other Intamin rides, they have some of the strongest airtime on Earth. Look at the first drops on Maverick, Fahrenheit, and Skyrush. Look at some of the airtime moments on El Toro at Great Adventure. That Rolling Thunder Hill, the camelbacks on some of those hypers. Statistically speaking, these moments can get close to -2 Gs of airtime, and that is a pretty intense amount. The most intense airtime moment on this ride documented is only -0.3 Gs, which is barely ejector. And if we're also looking at statistics, that is also the only ejector moment on the ride. Those bunny hills I mentioned before the launch, they are only positive Gs, which is kind of a bummer, but at the same time, maybe it isn't supposed to be. Looking at the pacing of this ride as well on the off-ride renderings, it does not look anywhere near as fast-paced as some of the RMC Raptors. I mean, look at some off-ride footage of Railblazer and Wonder Woman. Those things absolutely cream through their courses. Well, at the same time, this thing looks a lot slower. Looks like it's barely meandering through some of those elements. A pro I do have with this ride is also a complaint on many RMC Raptors. Basically, this has just a lap bar, while RMC Raptors do have those weird overall shoulder collars that sometimes bother the rider. So that's basically it while comparing the two. I mean, I would generally say that RMC Raptors will be better than the Intamin single rail coasters, but at the same time, the Intamin single rails look like they have their own gimmicks. Besides the obvious lap bar restraints, we also have launches. This will be the first launched single rail coaster and will also be the first multi-launched single rail coaster with 2 launches. Now, look at the last time RMC tried to install a coaster with 1 launch. And when it comes to the magnetic launches, Intamin is pretty good and reliable with them. If you're a park and you want to have a compact RMC, well, you're going to have to go with a lift hill, and that's going to take some more space. With a footprint as compact as what this coaster uses, you're going to need to use a launch, and that is exactly what they did. If you are a park and you want to order a single rail coaster with a launch, you're probably going to go towards Intamin instead of RMC, since they are a lot more reliable with launches. Now, that is definitely one great selling point that Intamin has over RMC, and I truly feel like the GP will still look at these 2 models and think, oh my goodness, it's a single rail coaster, and think nothing more. But as an enthusiast, the RMC single rail rides definitely look superior. But this ride definitely looks like it has its own standing point, being a launch single rail coaster, and it will appeal to a certain audience, and I believe it will be a successful ride at the end of the day. Now, what are your thoughts on this? I truly think it could have been better, but maybe Luna Park Sydney wanted it to be exactly how it is, so I really have no complaints. This is Cedar Flags, and I will see you guys later.